I hope that you are well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on pronouns. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username, as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts. Grade 7. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of use relative pronouns who, whom, whose, which, and that. And we have been, like, as I'm even scrolling, we've been doing pronouns, right? So this is basically the last chapter. Or let's say that this is going to be the last, is it the lesson? Yeah, this is going to be the last lesson under the chapter pronouns. So actually, I just say that the chapter is pronouns, right? And this is going to be the last lesson under our chapter pronouns. All right. So our chapter is pronouns. Our subject is English language arts. Grade 7. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on is who, whom, whose, which, and that. Right? And like we said, this is going to be the last lesson of our chapter pronouns, right? All right. So we are at the chapter of pronouns. All right. So when it comes to pronouns, right, we see that we are doing the lessons of who, whom, whose, which, and that, right? So we have relative pronouns, right? And a relative pronoun, it introduces a relative clause that describes a noun or it describes a pronoun. So a relative pronoun, it introduces a relative clause, right? And that describes a noun or it describes a pronoun. And the five main relative pronouns are words like who, whom, whose, which, and that. So we see that the five main relative pronouns are words like who, whom, whose, which, and that. And that relative pronoun, right? And the relative pronoun who and whom, they give information about people. All right. So we see that we have five relative pronouns, and our five relative pronouns are who, whom, whose, which, and that. And in the relative pronoun who and whom, they give information about people. And in order for us to figure out whether to use who or whom, right, we need to restate the information clause with a personal pronoun. And if the clause, right, uses a subject pronoun and a subject pronoun such as he, she, or they, then we use words like who. So we see that if the subject pronoun is he or she or they, All right, then we use the word who. And then if the clause uses an object pronoun, him, her, or them, all right. And if we look at an example, right, of either a subject pronoun as well as a object pronoun, right? And when or how we use who or whom, then it says the woman who lives next door grows tomatoes in a garden. So if we were to refer to the woman, right, and we put a pronoun over there, then we can say she. All right, so we see that the woman who lives next door grows tomatoes in a garden. And if we look at the woman, right, we can replace the woman with she. All right. And if we look at another example, right, it says Peter, whom you met yesterday, has four younger brothers. All right. So if we look at that example again, we can say Peter, whom you met yesterday, has four younger brothers, right? All right. So that is the difference between when to use who. Remember we said we use who when we use a subject pronoun, and when we use whom, right? We use who um when we use an object pronoun. All right. And then some relative pronouns that give necessary information about things, like necessary, not unnecessarily, it's details that is given. So then we have a relative pronoun that gives necessary information about things. And necessary information narrows down what you're talking about and is not set off by commas. For example, if we look at this example, it says we walk to the park that has a tire swing, right? It's a swing, but it's almost like a tire that you use for cars, but it's got that type of swing. So which means that the information it narrows down which park to walk to, right? Which means it is necessarily, which means that if there are like two or three parks within the, let's say within the community or within the area, and then we're specifically going to the park that has a tire swing, because not all parks will have a tire swing. And then if you look at the next one, it says the relative pronoun, which adds unnecessary information about things, right? It's like this is like extra information that is given. And the extra information that is given does not narrow down what you're talking about, because now it means that we won't really know what they're talking about. And it is always set off by commas. And if we look at an example of that, right? It says, we walked to Glendale Park. We walked to Glendale Park, which has a tire swing. So this is basically giving us extra information specifically because now it does not narrow down which park we walked to. So we said relative pronouns, which adds unnecessary information about things, and the extra information does not narrow down what you're talking about. It's always set off by commas, right? All right, so we said relative pronouns who shows position, the relative pronoun who shows position. For example, Emily, whose hair is quite long. And if we look at an example, it says, Emily, whose hair is quite long, likes wearing braids. So, Emily, whose hair is quite long, likes wearing braids, right? So, whose. And then it says, do not confuse whose with who. Guys, we always have this thing where we confuse either between who and whose or who and whom, right? Because once we add the apostrophe, right, to that word or to any word, once we add the apostrophe, oopsie, once we add the apostrophe, then it means who is. Whose who is. That is when we add the apostrophe is. And when it comes to pronouns, guys, remember with pronouns, we said we are specifically focusing on who and whom, whose, and and that, right? And we specifically focusing on the relative pronouns and how to use words like who and whose and that and which, right? So now we are by whose and who. And we see the relative pronoun whose shows position. Emily, whose hair is quite long, likes wearing braids, right? So that is when we use the word either who or we use it whose. Not whose with an apostrophe and s. Remember the word with an apostrophe s, it's like saying who is. And if we look at the specific word, right, the relative pronoun whose, which is, remember I said whose is, it's like saying who is, right? And if you look at whose, it says whose is a contraction for you or who has. So whose is a contraction for who is. Remember I mentioned that earlier on. It's a contraction for who is or has, and it does not show position, right? right. So now we're going on to a plus students.ca, and that is where we are going to use the relative pronoun who, whom, whose, which, and that, and we're also going to use it in a test, right? So now it says complete the sentence with the base relative pronoun. We either need to say if it whose or which. It says two oil industry workers to say whose amateur video of a tornado twisting through a North Dakota trailer park went viral online were quite lucky to escape the tornado unharmed. Or do we say two oil industry workers which amateur video of a tornado twisting? So we say whose or which? Whose or which? So we can then say two oil industry workers whose amateur video, right? So whose is correct. Scientists at Stanford University are testing a tiny therapeutic implant device known as an electroceutical, right? Do we have to say which uses electrical simulations to treat specific areas from within the body, or whom uses? So whom or which? So we can say which, right? And remember when we use, it's almost like we are using things or referring to things and we say which, or, but when we refer to whom or whose, right? Then it is specifically directly, like specifically talking about, people. So when the British band, the Who, appeared on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on September 16, 1967, the drummer placed explosives inside his drum kit. Do we say whom detonated or do we say which detonated? Temporarily knocking the show off the air. All right, so we say the kit which, and we say which detonated because it's a thing that went off, right? The invasion of Asian toads threaten Madagascar's unique ecology. Do we say which is vulnerable to outside predators and disease, or do we say whose is vulnerable and outside predator, predators, sorry, and diseases? All right, so we say the invasion of Asian toads threaten Madagascar's unique to ecology, which is vulnerable to the outside predators and disease. So we say which is, right? All right. So that is the end of our lesson, right? On who and whose. And remember, you need to know when to use who, and we usually use which and that for objects, and we use who and whom and whose specifically if we're referring to people, right? So that is the end of the lesson on pronouns. Thank you very much, grade 7, for joining the class. Till next time, goodbye.